All right, so without further ado, I think I'll call on our first speaker, Michael Watson.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. It's been actually, I think, a year or more since I've been here doing the sky this month, and I should say, and this isn't any slight against you, Paul, but the next month is actually going to be a fairly crappy month for stuff actually happening in the sky. No perigee moon, no eclipses. We're sort of halfway between the seasons, but we've got a really interesting couple of things coming up. And of course, this is the year of Mars, the closest approach since 2003. And so I'm going to talk about a number of things that I've talked about before. And so the sky this month. And what I've done is I've taken it from March 21st. Today, the day after, well, we're now into spring, which of course is why everybody's wearing t-shirts and shorts. My God, it's just unbelievable what's been happening the last month or so, right to the end of April. So it's sort of 5 weeks. And oh, yes, on April 30th, I will land in Melbourne, Australia for a month there, including about a week right in the outback during new moon. Oh yes, that is the, I think everybody understands what that is, the constellation Monoceros, still visible, so we'll talk about that. Anyway, we all know that the weather is terrible and has been, and I thought that I would do this graphic of what the sky has been like. All right, and that's what we generally have had until the last couple of nights, I guess it's fair to say. I've shown this before, but it always startles me. And that is mean cloud cover over Toronto, and you can see it from really essentially from the end of October all the way through to just about the end of March. We got more than 50% cloud cover, and all of that, of course, is at night when we want to be out, and we really start increasing now. And so, as we get into as we start getting into the spring, I'm always starting to be hopeful in March that we're going to get some clear skies. This time last year, I actually had 2 dark sky observing nights up in Algonquin Park in February and March. This year, I can't get anywhere close to it because it's been so cold and just no clear nights during new moon. Last weekend, I was up at our cottage in Muskoka. It was clear, minus 17 in Algonquin. Well, I've been doing this for a long time, but that's a little much even for me. And besides, the NCAA basketball tournament was on. So anyway, so that's what it is like, and we're now starting to move into the good weather season, which I just love. Anyway, so this is always really interesting because, of course, at this time of year, right at the March equinox, we get the greatest day-by-day difference in extension of time in sunset and sunrise, and the length of the sun being, not the length of the day, of the sun being above the horizon. And so, as of today, this is the amount of time we have. Of course, today's the first full day of spring. And by the way, you might think, well, geez, why shouldn't it be 12 hours or 12 hours in a minute? We have to take into consideration atmospheric refraction that lifts the sun above the horizon about 1 degree, or at this latitude, maybe around 4 to 5 minutes. So what that means is that we've got slightly right on the equinox, a little bit longer than 12 hours of daylight. But 1 month from now, you can see that we're going to have gone up an hour and a half already. So it's really increasing a lot, about 1.5 minutes every day at this time, which is why I really, really like this time of year. And of course, conversely, when we get to September 20th or 21st, at the September equinox, we're losing that amount of time, which means a greater amount of dark sky, of course. Oh, and by the way, that is a sunset at Lennox Addington Deep Sky or Dark Sky site out near Kingston a couple of years ago. Okay, so let's just talk about the planets. I think we generally know where they are. It would have been great if I had been doing this talk, 3 weeks ago, but we're just coming off a really favorable appearance of Mercury. How many people here, if you just put your hands up, how many people saw Mercury at this appearance? Okay, All right, an awful lot of you. Well, it's not surprising. Mercury generally has one good appearance in the evening sky, which is always going to be in the spring, and in the fall sky, which is going to be in the fall. As some people may know, that even Galileo never himself actually saw Mercury because of the mists of Padua where he was. It's elusive, but it was really pretty, particularly on Sunday night when there was the crescent moon. Some of you may have seen my photograph up on Flickr of the moon and Venus, and then Mercury, very faint now, and it's getting really faint day by day. But it's coming off a favorable appearance, and even just by next week it's going to plunge down, and it's going to be really invisible until it reemerges on the other side of the sun in the morning sky in April. But in the spring, in the morning sky, the ecliptic makes a really shallow angle, as opposed to in the evening sky where it makes a very sharp angle, and as a result, Mercury is going to be really invisible at that time. It's going to be a very bad appearance. So we've really kind of had it for this half of the year. Venus is going to be dominating the evening sky now for a month, absolutely for a month. Although it's small in size, it's going around from inferior conjunction, it's wending its way around the other side of the sun, and so it's actually fairly small. There was a really good approach. This is one really interesting thing. This is going to be, well, next week. An interesting and really close conjunction of Venus and Uranus will be seen only in telescopes, of course, because Uranus right now is about magnitude 5.9, but it'll be about a 3-second diameter, nice little blue disk in a fairly dark sky. And of course, Venus is brilliant, so that's going to be pretty interesting to see. And it's not going to be until August that it gets to its greatest elongation of 46 degrees from the sun, which is the maximum, well, 47 is, that it ever gets from the sun. So just to review sort of what's been happening, so this is using Dave Lane's Earth-Centered Universe, which is my favorite planetarium program. So the sun, sort of mid-twilight, about 8 to 9 degrees below the horizon, and you can see the path of Mercury there. This then, where it is right now, that was just about 1 week ago. Well, sorry, that was that's actually tonight. And then you can see that Mercury is actually really already faded. It was approximately magnitude minus 0.5, so it's really starting to fade now, even as it gets larger in diameter and becomes a very thin razor. And so in 5 days, it fades by 2 magnitudes. It's increasing in diameter just a little bit, but it's really fading. And 5 days after that, it's just unobservable because the sun actually has moved up, or to put it another way, Mercury's actually further, closer to the sun. And then by April 1, it's in conjunction with the sun. So over the next couple of days, really, that's all we're going to see. So this is kind of a review of what Mercury and Venus looked like over the past couple of weeks. Now, Venus does pass close to the Pleiades, and this is just over the next very few days, and we're supposed to have decent weather. We're not getting the apparently 1/3 of a meter of snow that Washington and New York are getting, although I think that actually part of that in Washington at least is because of the Stormy Daniels lawsuit. But that's a different story. They're getting a couple of different storms. Anyway, so Venus gets close to the Pleiades, and it's always fun to see Venus and the Pleiades in the evening sky as twilight ends. We get it every 2 or 3 years. We've got the Pleiades here, and Venus progressing as we see 2 days by 2 days up in this direction. And so it's going to be, I think, a really a nice apparition. 3 and a bit degrees away, you'll be able to get that very nicely. And this was a very similar view back in 2016, taken with a 200 millimeter lens. Venus obviously brilliant, and it's a really, really nice view. So be looking for that if we have clear skies. It's right in the evening. You can still catch the Sweet 16 in the NCAA basketball tournament on tomorrow night and Friday, and pop in and out, and you can see Venus passing by the Pleiades. It's really nice. And another slightly wider view where you can also see the Hyades over on the left. So that was a couple of years ago. Really, really nice view. Okay, so let's then get to Jupiter, and it's starting to make its appearance in the spring sky. Tonight, for example, it rises just before midnight, but it's really moving fast, partly because it's in retrograde motion, and obviously, you know, we're advancing in the year, so it starts becoming visible much earlier by the end of April. All right. And then Jupiter this year is in Libra, and so here's a view we can see Pluto, Saturn, and Mars. I'm going to get to them in a moment. But right at 3 o'clock in the morning, when of course you know everybody is up or not yet gone to bed, so April 10th, right in the middle of this month period, we see Scorpius down here and Sagittarius just rising in the southeast, and Jupiter right here in Libra. And over here we have Leo, and I'm going to just show a photograph of that a little bit later. So zooming in a little bit, we see Saturn and Mars and then Jupiter. Jupiter getting closer. It's going to be about, I think, 3 years until we get the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which is always really interesting to see every approximately, I think it's 18 years. Now, a couple of years ago, just to give you an idea here, anybody recognize that constellation? Okay, so there you go. Twilight, and as you can see, this one I photographed in April, so you know, sort of within this 1 month period, and this was 2 years ago. Really pretty when Leo is you know, sort of starting to get over into the western sky, and this I deliberately shot this during twilight just to see what it would look like, and it's a pretty nice view. Saturn now. Saturn is in the morning sky. We're not going to see all that much of it right now, but we do get a close conjunction on April 2nd, but you got to get up really early in the morning, just as morning twilight is starting. If you've got a low southern horizon, this is it's going to be actually a really close conjunction, and of course Mars is now starting to get really quite bright, heading to its brightest and its closest on May 30th. Now, right now, Saturn's rings are fairly wide open, reached the maximum openness last October, and now we're going to get several years when Saturn's rings will be closing up, but we've got a really nice view of Saturn these years, I would say. And so then, of course, we have Mars, and whoever gets lucky enough, Chris, that's probably going to be you, doing the sky this month. Next month, it's all going to be about Mars because we get, as I say, the closest approach and the brightest since 2003, which was, according to all sorts of websites, the closest that Mars would ever get. It was sort of sitting in your backyard. The Mars hoax. So May 30th. So tomorrow morning, if you get up early, that's what's going to be fairly small. Still not even 0 magnitude, but it's starting to get significantly closer, which is another way of saying that Earth is starting to catch up to it. But in just 1 month, it's going to have increased significantly in both brightness and in size. Of course, every time Mars comes close, it's always down in Scorpius and Sagittarius, and that means that it's not favorable viewing for Northern Hemisphere. But I'll just mention again that in April, I'm going to be in Australia. So it's going to be right up there. And it's going to be right up there, right in the center of the Milky Way. So I'm looking forward to photographing that. And I think that you're all very familiar with this. We have the various conjunctions, 2010, quite far away. And of course, this is all because Mars has a very eccentric orbit. And therefore, at conjunctions which take place approximately every 2 years, a little more than 2 years apart, Earth and Mars, we have vastly differing distances between the two planets, and therefore sizes of Mars, and therefore brightnesses. And so we can see the significant difference here. 2010 and 2012, about the same. 2014 getting closer. 2016, a lot closer, and then 2018 is really close, and 2003 was right in around there. And by the time we get to 2020 now, it's getting further away. So for the next really, well, more than a dozen years, this year is going to be the best for Mars. And I just hope I'm around the next time that it comes around. So this really is a very good year. And just to give you an idea, 2016 and, well, 2018 obviously is simply blown up. It's the same photograph because they haven't photographed it yet for this year. But that gives an approximate indication. And so there's a very significant size difference. This is a really, really favorable opposition. Okay, so Mars in Sagittarius, we can see this then is the movement of Mars through Sagittarius from March 21st to April 30th. And you can see Saturn here moving because, of course, it's so far out and it moves very, very slowly. It describes a very small circumscribed path, but Mars is moving really, really fast. And here again, April 2nd, which is about a week and a half from now, we're going to get a fairly close conjunction of the two. And so that is going to be the view on the morning of April 2nd. And I think that it's going to really well repay getting up and taking a look if you got a nice southern horizon, even from the city. Absolutely. And then 5 days later, the moon joins. And so that's going to be a really nice view. Essentially third quarter moon with Saturn and Mars. I think that's going to be really pretty. All right. So back in 2016, just to give you an idea of kind of what they looked like. Remember, 2016 was a good apparition for Mars, not quite as good. But here they were in, and I shot this from Torrance Barrens. Here we can see Antares and Scorpius and Saturn there and Mars over there. And, it makes for a really, really pretty view. Obviously, Mars is brighter than Saturn is when it's close like it is now. And you can see all sorts of Messier objects here as well, the great globular clusters. And this was a little bit closer. Again, this was from Torrance Barrens, and we can start to we see again Antares and all of the diffuse nebulosity here. Mars really bright, getting close to Saturn back in 2016. So this is the kind of thing that we're going to see, and it's going to be a really, really nice view. So moon phases now. I think that we all know that we just passed new moon this past Saturday, and so we're in the waning, the waxing crescent phase. And 3 days from now, it's first quarter, and then full moon. An unremarkable one is going to be next month. There's no perigee moon. I refuse to use that other name. There's no apogee moon. It's just an ordinary full moon. And then another new moon, and that's when I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to get up into Algonquin Park to do some work just about a week and a half before we leave. So next new moon, right in on April 16th. So that's going to be a good weekend. And then May 15th again. And so what I like about this time of year is that is the waxing crescent moon. Because the ecliptic makes such a steep angle with the horizon, when you have the waxing crescent moon, it stands very high above the sun and very high in altitude. Now in some years, about 9 years from now, it's actually going to be better because it's going to be north of the ecliptic. Right now it's south of the ecliptic. But still, you can get a really nice view. And so we see here, this was, this was a view last night, right from Toronto. And then last year, right around this time, crescent moon, and you get great earth shine. You get it really high in the sky. And as you can see, lots of stars around it as well. So it's a terrific time. And April is almost as good as March for getting the waxing crescent moon high in the sky. So if you've got any kind of camera at all, you can get a really nice view of that. Now, we don't get anything like this. This is the perigee and the apogee full moons, and that is approximately the difference between them. As Neil deGrasse Tyson said, it's trying to determine, discern the difference in size between a 14-inch pizza and a 15-inch pizza held at about 30 meters distance. Okay, you try to do that. I'll have that little piece, please, over there. Okay. Now, something else that we do get, however, in the middle of April is a really nice view. By this time, the Pleiades and the Hyades will have sunk. This, again, is kind of mid-twilight, and we get the moon joining Venus. Venus is moving very, very quickly in the sky, and so we get a really nice view there on April 17th with a waxing crescent moon. And then just to give you an example, here is a photo of Moon, Mars, and Venus back in in November of 2015. It's actually not that good a photo of the moon. It's kind of hazy and so on. Obviously, we have Venus there and Mars, but anytime Venus and the moon get close, it can be a really, really pretty view. The moon is passing fairly close to Aldebaran on March 22nd. You can see it's about here, about 3 hours after it will have glided past Aldebaran. And therefore, you know, it won't be absolutely the closest approach because the sun will still be up. Further east, it'll be better. But just to remind you, last March we had the grazing occultation of Aldebaran. Randy Atwood and Betty Robinson and I went out to Mississauga to observe that and saw a graze, and those are successive images of Aldebaran just being grazing past the almost first quarter moon. Then the moon also comes fairly close to M44, the Beehive cluster in Cancer, which can make a nice view. Although it's a gibbous moon, and so there's going to be a lot of light flooding into the sky. This is a photograph from a couple of years ago, I guess, that I did of the Beehive with its two bright guardian stars. It's kind of in the middle of nothing, and so you might as well take a look at that. At this time of year. There's only one even decent occultation in the next 5 weeks, and that is of 16 Leonis, which is a naked eye star, 5.3. And so I'm looking forward to that because actually it's just before midnight, and it's only 6 days from now. So that's a fairly decent one to see. And then the moon is actually in the middle of the Hyades on April 18th, and that should be a really nice view for any photographers out there. A 200 millimeter lens and just a few seconds exposure will catch that, and it'll be a really, really nice view. And so, okay, so that's the moon, the planets, but also obviously we've got our constellations. And this is a photograph taken around the same time 2 years ago, with Orion starting to set in the west. This is also from Taurus Barons, taken in April. And so let's take a look and just remind ourselves about what is out there in the sky. And what I'm talking about really is between sort of mid-twilight and midnight, when everybody who at least is still working and not retired has to go to bed. And so in the northwest, we still have Auriga here, and Capella, bright star, and of course all of these great open clusters, which I just adore. M's 30, 6, 7, and 8, the three of them fairly close together, and then their companion over the border into Gemini is M35. So those are, and those, because they're open clusters, you can see those from in the telescope from the city without too much difficulty, although obviously a dark sky is really great for that. And so from a darker sky, but this actually is April, after twilight ends, and we get, and you can see there, just toggle back and forth. So we have Capella here, and then the familiar figure of Auriga with the three open clusters there. And so you can still see that really, really nicely this time of year. Because it's fairly far north in the sky, you can also then start to see it again in September toward morning as it's starting to rise again in the northeast. It's one of my favorite constellations for that. And so now we get, this is a 200 millimeter lens view, the three open clusters as well in Auriga. Really pretty, and with quite different personalities, as you can see. M38, much more broad and sort of diffuse, and much fainter. M36 and 37, more concentrated and close to naked eye visibility. And then taken through the 6-inch refractor, you can see that they look quite different. So I really like these optics, and it's a great constellation. And then again, I like shooting these in evening twilight. It's really quite pretty to see this. And here we have Canis Minor and Gemini, and with Procyon here, and then the Beehive. And then one that is not known quite as well, I think M67, but it's a really pretty little cluster that I really like looking at when the Beehive is up. So we see, this is M35, and then another one that's not known nearly as well is NGC 2156. And these you can see with a decent telescope from the city, again, because they're open clusters. Okay. And now, so Orion, obviously this is not taken from, from Midtown Toronto, but Orion is still visible, starting to set in the west, and we're all familiar with the Rosette, and then Barnard's Loop. This one was, I shot from Algonquin Park. I think it was last year, actually. And so this, all of this is still visible. There's one a couple of years ago setting in the west. And, everybody knows these. I actually like shooting these fairly wide angle so that you can see the relative positions of all of these. The belt of Orion, Mintaka, Eldolam, and Alnitak. We see the Zeta Orionis Nebula, a very different color than the nebulosity that produces the Horsehead Nebula. And then, of course, we get both reflection and emission nebulosity in the Great Orion Nebula. So I really like seeing that. Yeah, pretty views. I do like these actually a lot. And a couple of years ago, that was a bit of an experimental shot through the refractor. This is just a series, by the way, of 1-minute exposures. Some of you have seen this photo before. Okay. And then the Rosette, and this is hard to see. You really got to be out into a dark sky. But if you get out there, you can see it, and you can actually see it in binoculars. Not with the colors, obviously. Only the camera shows that. And then our great nebulosity around the Pleiades. This was from last year. Okay, so this now 2 years ago. It's really interesting how Jupiter moves. We know that Jupiter has an orbital period of almost exactly 12 years. It's 11.86 years. So every year, it's moving essentially one constellation to the east. And so 2 years ago, it was in Leo, and it was passing through sort of southern Leo, and it made a really, really interesting view. And so obviously, this is very well known. The Lion's Head in Maine and the hindquarters Denebola, and Jupiter was down here. So it makes a really, really interesting view, and now it's moved over 2 constellations. However, if you get into a dark sky, we know that Leo has 4 of the really great Messier galaxies, and those are M's 65, 66, and then in the 90s as well. And what's really interesting, and this was actually a little bit of an experimental shot as well, shot through the 5-inch refractor, and go backwards here. And so these are easy to see in really any size telescope if you get into a dark sky. And also NGC 3620, I don't know how messy, he must have gone in to watch something or have another glass of wine. I don't know how he overlooked that, or maybe his telescope just couldn't get up high enough. But I don't know how he missed that, because this M65 is 9.3, this is 9.5. And so one would have thought, well, it'd be fairly easy to see, but who knows? Maybe he was just messing with us, or he wanted to leave it for Méchain to discover, as he did with some of the others. Anyway, this is a really, really nice field of view. And how many, does anybody here have a Messier certificate? Anybody who's actually seen all of them? Okay, a few. Now, how many people have seen these 2 ever? All right, a bunch more of you. They're really, really pretty. And of course, they are just the prelude to the great Virgo cluster of galaxies further to the east. Virgo and Ursa Major. And of course, it's Ursa Major where we have M51 as well. So I'm just about going to finish up, but we can't forget the northern constellations out of the Milky Way and away from the ecliptic. And what's this one? Okay. So, yeah, and it's a really pretty constellation. I really like it, or actually a star pattern. The constellation is the area of the sky, sort of properly speaking. And obviously everybody knows this. So, but it's interesting just to sort of think about where these objects are in relation to the bright stars. And so we have here M51, the Whirlpool, M101, which is a large, almost face-on spiral galaxy, is right up around here. Alcor and Mizar, well, Mizar is the bright one. Alcor, the horse and the rider in ancient Arabic, which is always a test for visual acuity. If you could separate those 2, naked eye, which you should be able to do. and then M106, and here some other Messier objects that are a little more difficult to see, M97, Owl Nebula, and so on. So it's a great constellation, I think, with a lot of good objects. This one, again, more sort of experimental than anything else, shot through the 5-inch refractor. Always a really pretty object. And of course, Orion is now starting to rise in it, and by the time you get to close to midnight now, it's almost overhead, sort of upside down, if you know, based on how we're used to looking at it. But all of these objects now are really getting to be very high in the sky, and especially if you get out into a dark sky. And now these were shot through Meade 10-inch, a Meade 12-inch telescope up in Algonquin Park again. And M's 81 and 82 are really, really pretty objects. Obviously, you get the colors in that only with long exposure photographs. Although, again, I'm going to tell you, you may be surprised at this. This is stacked only 2-minute exposures through the 12-inch telescope. And then as we get to midnight, M13 and Hercules, the actually the second brightest globular cluster in the northern hemisphere compared to M22, but it's much higher and one of the just the great objects in the sky, and we start to see that then rising in the east just before midnight. And therefore, I told you I wouldn't be longer than half an hour. So that is the sky this month for the next 5 weeks. Thank you very much.
Questions for Michael? Hey, Ron.
Could you go to... have you closed your program yet?
I don't know.
Could you go to an image of the crescent moon that you had? I think it's about a third of the way through, please.
Actually, you know what? Yeah, if you can.
If it's close, don't worry about it.
Yes, right. It's back near the beginning. Yeah, anyway, so...
Basically, I find images I take and yours, it's not symmetrical. Like,
what do you mean by that?
One horn seems a different shape than the other one. And I've never understood it.
Okay. Well, good for you. You've got either way better eyes or way worse eyes than I do. I don't know, but I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. Part of it may be because of the orientation that is in the sky. If you were, for example, if you were closer to the equator where it was exactly even, where the cusps were at exactly the same level, my guess is you would say, oh yeah, that looks symmetrical. I think there's probably an optical illusion. That's number one. Number two, the other thing is that, remember, the northern hemisphere of the moon is far less rugged than the south, and there are more maria in the north, and I think that has a psychological effect on how you actually perceive the moon. When I look at the moon in the southern hemisphere and it's turned around the wrong way, as we say, our northern hemisphere is, sort of biased. It looks very different. So I don't know, maybe, but I'm going to say there's probably maybe those two things together. I don't know. Yeah. Okay? Done.
Any other questions? Anybody else? Okay, well, Michael, thank you very much. Awesome presentation. Would you believe that Michael went through 127 slides? Right? Yes. Right. When he told me that, I thought, oh my God, 127 slides will be there for over an hour.
You should have seen his emails for you. Michael, you've got only half an hour. I said, oh shit, I thought I had, a day and a half.
And something else that's remarkable is it looks to me like you provided every single photograph yourself for this presentation.
Oh yeah.
You did, yes. Very, very well done. And other than the sky this month, this was also an astrophotography presentation in a sense. So thank you so much, Michael. And,